About a year and a half ago, oh yeah, here comes the other one. About a year and a half ago, me and a mate relaid this entire deck with new decking boards, Vitex, which is a hardwood out of the Solomon Islands, I believe. And that was followed by a bit of a comedy of errors, which got us to this point right here. First of all, when we were laying the deck, it ended up that I had a soak pit being dug in the backyard right next to the deck at the same time. It was autumn, so there was rain, and it was just the backyard became a muddy bog, which ended up being transferred all over the deck. So then I needed to give it a clean before I could oil it, and I only had a day to get that done before I had to get back to work. So I managed to clean it. I raced off to the hardware store. I got some oil, which was described as natural, which I assumed was the natural colour of the timber, but in fact that was a tint. On top of that, it wasn't a great oil, so really what started happening with the deck is that there's a little bit of splitting going on, a little bit of cupping of the boards, and on top of that what you can see here is a year and a half of, you know, grime and general build up and mouldiness and stuff like that. So I'm going to rejuvenate this deck. I'm giving it a full makeover, which is going to be a 3-part process. First of all, I'm going to clean the deck with a deck cleaning solution, scrub that down, then lightly water blast the deck. Then I'm getting a floor sander to entirely sand the deck, get rid of all that cupping, smooth it out, get rid of that coloured stain that I didn't like, and then finally recoat the deck with 2 coats of a really good quality clear oil. So first step of this process is to give the deck a good clean with a wood cleaning product like this one here, and like I say, I'll lightly water blast it, and then that'll be ready for me to bring in a floor sander and get this thing looking really nice before I can oil it. It's been about a week since I washed the deck, and I was surprised at how well that actually came up, but you can still see there's a lot of variation in colour underneath the barbecue table where the old tint hasn't faded, underneath the barbecue where it hasn't faded, but it's definitely come up much better after a clean. And I reckon if I only got a good quality oil on initially, I wouldn't have to go through this process now. But I guess it's time to start sanding. I've been given this floor sander by the guys at Highpool, and this is what's going to allow me to take 1 or 2 mil off the surface of this deck and hopefully make it look brand new again. I've never used one before, and there's 2 types. There's this type, the drum sander, and then there's more of an orbital big pad polisher type sander. Now those ones, if you've just got a deck that needs just a little bit of a touch up, that's what you want to use, because these can be pretty aggressive, and I'm a little bit nervous. If you're not careful, it's quite easy to leave gouges and marks on a deck. So again, having never used one before, I'm going to be very cautious. I'm not going to want to go with too high a grit. I'm going to start with a 120. I do have an 80, so I'll have a couple of passes with a 120, see how it goes, and if I feel confident and I need to, I'll move down to the 80. So I got through about half of the first layer of sanding before I ran out of light yesterday, and to be honest, it was a lot easier than I was expecting. I was really nervous that maybe I should have just paid a floor sander to come in and do this, and you know, that I was going to leave marks and it was going to be visible what I've done. But in fact the technique's really simple. You know, you just start moving forward before you lower the drum, you lift the drum before you get to the end of your run. Really basic. And I got up this morning all fired up to crack into it and hopefully get this completed today, but then it poured down with rain, so I'm still just waiting for it to dry off before I continue on. And while I'm waiting for that to dry off, I thought I'd show you the progress so far, show you what I've done, yeah, and talk about where to go from here. So this is where I started off, and I started off with a 120 grit, playing it safe, but quickly changed to the 80 grit. And you can tell that I was taking a little bit easier here. You can see these areas that are still cupped, haven't completely flattened off. Whereas once I built up some confidence, you can see over here I let it sand a bit harder and got down to a flatter surface. It's actually, you know, it's really hard to see it on a camera and on the screen, but in person you can see it, and you can also feel it under your feet. So on this new section, it's already looking nice and flat, and again it helps give it that newer look, as a nice new board should be flat. Now the way you get rid of that cupping and flatten the boards is to run diagonally across the boards, and you can see that really clearly with that 80 grit, those lines. So my next stage, once I finish the area over there, will be to swap to 100 and maybe 120 and run with the grain the length of the boards to smooth those off and make them look nice before they're ready for oiling. Now while I'm waiting for the deck to dry off so I can start sanding today, you may have been wondering why these steps and this little bit of decking in the background look so different. This deck was done only recently in the last few months, and as soon as it was done I got this oil on it, so it's had 2 coats. Now that's what should have happened with this deck when it was laid. So now this one is fully protected. I would expect this to fade off a bit and look a bit more natural. It's a little bit yellowy because of the oil, but I imagine that once a year this will require a coat of oil to keep it in the same sort of condition where you can see this water sits on top, it's not cupping, it's not splitting, and just generally it feels like it's in much better condition and easier to clean. These steps were done at the same time as this deck, and they looked exactly the same. They were faded, they were cupping, they were cracked, they were in really poor condition, they were going mouldy. So while we were in lockdown and I couldn't get the flooring sander, I used an orbital hand sander, and I gave this all a big clean, and I sanded it all back and I oiled it again, 2 coats. Again, this colour isn't the colour I'm after. This oil really exaggerates the colour of the timber, and I'd expect this to fade off fairly quickly now that summer's arrived. But as you can see, it's a massive improvement on where it was before. Well, I've now done the entire top of the deck with the diagonal to flatten the boards with 80 grit, and now I'm going to move on to 100 grit and then 120 running the length of the board. So that's 3 levels of sanding. 80 grit on the diagonal to flatten the boards, and then 100 grit and 120 along the length of the board to give it a nice smooth finish. And it's pretty smooth. So now all that's left is for me to edge sand everything that I can't get to with this. Fingers crossed it doesn't take me too long so that I can get a first coat of oil on here before the end of the day. Now likewise as with the drum sander, Highpool have given me this to use. It's an edging sander, I don't know if that's the correct term, edge flooring sander. I've never used one before, but here goes nothing. Okay, it's got quite a bit of grunt, so you've got to hold on to it, and I need to put a dust bag on. Now as you can see, all the sanding is complete, but I've run into an issue. I won't be able to get the oil down with enough drying time before any rain that could arrive tonight will arrive, which means I can't oil it. The other issue is that I've had a few spits before, and if you look down here you can see the little water marks that's created, little water stains. So even if I could oil it, I wouldn't want to oil over the top of that because potentially that shows through. So now what I'm going to have to do is wait for tomorrow and hope that it'll dry out from any overnight rain in time for me to oil it again before any potential showers happen tomorrow afternoon. The lesson here is you do this job in the middle of summer when there's no chance of rain, but now's when I've got the time to do it. So we cross our fingers and hope that tomorrow we get the opportunity to oil down before any rain comes. Well, it turns out Murphy's Law has been in full effect both last night and this morning. Last night the rain that was supposed to come didn't actually eventuate, so I could have put a layer of oil down yesterday. But then of course this morning it rained, so I've had to wait all day for that to dry. Now that rain's done two things to the deck. It's left some water staining watermarks on the top that I now need to get rid of, and also moisture on freshly sanded timber affects the fibres, and so the surface of the timber isn't as smooth as it was yesterday when I finished sanding. So I'm going to really quickly run over this with the 120 grit once more, as light as possible, and I should be able to bring that back to that nice finish I had yesterday. I'll get into that as quick as I can so that I can get this oil down. I'm laying down 2 coats of a good quality clear oil, no tint in it, and I'm using an oil-based oil, not a water-based. Oiling the deck is by far the quickest and easiest part of this whole process. As you can see, you can just bang this out really quickly. It's not like painting. There's not like a really high skill set that you need. You can't really get it wrong. You're not going to leave marks or streaks or anything. It just a nice thin coat on top, and it'll soak in and dry in about a week before I put on a second coat. Well, this is about three weeks since I've finished the deck. Since then we've had a bit of sun, bit of rain, hot, cold, and already the colour of the deck is starting to weather a little bit, start to fade to a slightly more natural look, which is what I'm after. The good thing about it is that, you know, whenever it rains you can see the water sits on top, it doesn't soak into the timber, and that's part of the process of protecting it. But super happy. Like I've said during this video, I was nervous about doing the drum sanding, and you know, a couple of times thought, gee, maybe I should just get a floor sander in, and because I'll end up wrecking the deck. But it was way easier than I thought. Apart from the issues I had with rain and stuff, you can bang it out in a day or two, and I think the results sort of speak for themselves. Like, this deck beforehand was ugly, it was discoloured, it had mould, the boards were cupping, and now everything's flat, everything's good, everything's protected, it looks great. Yeah, all in all, I'm pretty stoked. So if you're thinking about having a go at rejuvenating your deck, tidying it up, whether it's just sanding or just the cleaning and the oiling, it's worth it. Give it a crack.